Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Peter Isisele, and in this episode of Success Series, I have Dr. Taiwo Bello, an assistant professor at Oklahoma State University. In this episode, he will be sharing his experience, moving from Nigeria to Canada, and then all the way to the United States as an assistant professor. We have a lot of things to learn from him today. Without further ado, I will give him the opportunity to introduce himself briefly to us.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Isesele. Well, as you've introduced me, I am Dr. Taiwo Bello. I'm an assistant professor of African history in the Department of History at Oklahoma State University. Thank you very much for having me on your program.
Thank you so much. It's really an amazing opportunity to have a conversation with you and doing some great work in African history over there. So, back then in Nigeria, you had your undergraduate program in history. So what are some of the, motivating factors to, studying history back then in your undergrad?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for taking me back memory lane. As you see, those periods when we were studying history, I'm talking about, some good 15, 16, 17, 20 years ago, people never believed that history could take them anywhere.
Yeah.
My own intention, in short, history was not my first love. My first love was economics. I wanted to study economics, but then I couldn't make the cut. I couldn't get into the program. Right. Then I tried to switch to psychology. Just using psychology to move maybe a year later into economics. I still couldn't make it to economics. Then one of my friends advised me to go for history, that history would be, a good course for me because I was interested in literature. I was interested in arts. I was interested in other kinds of things. And I was always having, good grades in those areas. Then he advised me to go for history. And I said, okay, why not? I could use that, to get into the university and then see whether I would be able to switch to economics or psychology or just social science, core social sciences, later. But then after I got admitted into that program, of course, just to cheat this in, I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Ibadan.
Great University of Ibadan.
The University of Ibadan. Yeah. But then in the course of studying history, I realized that, there is more to this discipline than, I previously thought. So I began to see different opportunities, attached to, studying history. One, I wanted to become an ambassador, and I felt, okay, studying history might help me to get to that, external affair kind of territory or the likes, right? And then that was one motivation. And also, I'd always loved teaching, right? So then I embraced history for 3 reasons. One, my love for knowledge, right? Because I crave knowledge, right? I love to learn new things, especially learning things that are not available to everyone.
And everybody, yes.
Does to you, right?
Exactly.
Because you have to go dig deeper into archives to get those information that we don't have access to today.
So they begin to see all of the connections between different stories.
Exactly. So the ability to bring stories together. So that's one motivating factor. The second motivating factor is that I wanted to become a professor. I wanted to teach.
So you already had it in mind, like you were already thinking about it in your initial undergrad times. That oh, that was wow. You already decided pretty early, which is good.
Yeah, since my undergraduate days, I'd wanted to be a professor.
Oh wow.
So this is like a dream come true, right?
Oh wow, that's
So,
beautiful. That's beautiful.
yeah, so that's the second motivation. The third one is that like I said, I wanted to become an ambassador. I wanted to be, Nigeria's ambassador to maybe Australia or Canada or the United States or whatever. And having looked at the profiles of those who had been Nigeria's ambassadors in the past, I realized that they studied history. That then gave me that motivation to push and forge ahead, and that's also influences the kind of research that I do today, because the research that I do today focuses in the areas of diplomacy, global history, international relations, international affairs, war, conflict, gender, but mostly from global perspective. Right.
And that's a very that I think that's a very in demand and niched area that has a lot of international correlation attached to it.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh wow.
So those are
Yeah.
the three primary motivations, for studying history.
And then after your undergraduate, back in Nigeria, you went to Geneva for your master's. So was there anything spectacular, about the choice of Geneva or something like that?
Oh yes. I mean this still ties with me wanting to become an ambassador, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
Nigeria. Right. Because the university that I attended uh in Geneva is called the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. It is located at the heart of Geneva. And if you know Geneva very well, Geneva is where you have all these global,
Global
international
stuff. Yeah.
organizations, right?
Yeah.
You have UN bodies, UN organizations. You have, International Committee of the Red Cross. You have, huge UNHCR and other key global organizations, right? And that city is also like a meeting point for diplomats. You'll find Nigerian diplomats. You'll find even in short, the the former foreign affairs minister of Nigeria,
Yeah.
Mr. Godfrey Oyema.
Yeah, Godfrey Yema, yeah.
Yes, I met him in Geneva.
Oh wow.
I met him before he became Nigeria's minister.
Wow.
In short, I used to visit his office.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yes, he was then working at WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization. Right.
Oh,
It was a deputy director at the time, before he became the minister of foreign affairs. So I used to go to his office. Uh, he would sit me down, advise me about life and the like. So I really enjoyed the kind of connections I was able to make, being in Geneva. And they say, your location determines, how far you would go. Right.
that's
So
very correct.
if you are in a rural area, there's there's a very high chance that you would not break into the kind of limelight that you want. Right.
Yeah, I
This-
see a lot of intentionality about the choice of location, and if you already know what you want, then you know where to go to get what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And that
I went to that school because it's right at the heart of Geneva, where you could access everything, you know.
wow,
Yeah. So I was really intentional about what I wanted, right?
wow,
Because I knew that was a place. where I would be able to meet with, influential Nigerians.
Evan over videos.
Yeah, and I was able to actually connect with a lot of very influential Nigerians. One of them, uh, Jeffrey Onyema.
That's beautiful. Yeah, yeah. I read a little bit about him when he was a foreign minister at that time, and he did really great. So after all, and some of those persons they've had huge experience in a lot of maybe public, private sector, international organizations, and then kind of bringing into all of those experiences into home government, I think is very unique. And so after you finished your masters, and then so the next thing is moving to Canada. So to the University of Saskatchewan. So what also influenced your choice to do like the Masters of Art in Political Science in University of Saskatchewan, and was that tied to the long-term plan that you had?
Yes, actually, that's a very good question. You see, everything about my life is connected. you know,
Wow.
um, I did my first master's degree at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. But then I obtained 2 degrees from that program, right? One in the field of international history, and the second one in the field of international history and politics, right?
Oh, okay.
So I got 2 degrees from it. But my major was international history. I only had to take some classes in the area of political science, right? So after I finished that program in 2013, I worked within the United Nations. I worked um, for WMO, that's World Meteorological Organization, right,
Okay.
as a research associate for a year and a half. Then I went back to Nigeria. It was while in Nigeria that I applied to the University of Saskatchewan for political study. They don't call it political science there. They call it political studies. Right.
Oh, political studies.
Yes, a very interesting course. Then you would ask why someone you already got 2 master's degree.
Masters. Yeah. Well, that's what I was about to ask.
Why did you have to go for a third one? You know, I felt, having obtained a full degree in international history, I felt competent in that area because
Okay.
my bachelor's was in history.
So the bachelor's is a bit generic, like it can
Very generic. Yeah,
areas.
you do European history, you do African history, you do Asian history, kind of you do all kinds.
All right.
And that's very helpful because
Exactly.
it's still part of the things that I heard.
So yes, we can choose to specialize, in those areas. Sometimes when you have to like teach now, sometimes you may not only teach your areas, you may teach some other parts, and which is very helpful from your.
As a matter of fact, I'm not teaching African history now. I teach global history. I talk about Asia, I talk about North America, I talk about South America, I talk about the Caribbean, I talk about, so it's like that, right? So to do well in our field, you need to know other areas, right? Areas. You have to teach world history. You have to teach global history. You have to teach histories um, that are not within your strict area of training, right? And that's the part. That's a very good kind of approach to learning, right?
Exactly.
So after I'd obtained that degree, those degrees from the Graduate Institute, I felt competent in the field of history. Bachelor's in history, master's in international history, very good. But then the other side of my degree, which is international history and politics. I did not feel competent in the area of political science. I didn't feel like I had learned like the nitty gritty of political science. So that was then what gave me the motivation to apply for a full degree program in political science. And I indicated that in my application that look, I've got, competence in this area, but I feel
This
like,
is what is missing.
yes, I feel like something is missing. I want to learn about, theories of international relations. I want to be able to do comparative politics. I want to be able to do this and that, right? So those were the kinds of things that propelled me towards University of Saskatchewan to study, a third master's in the area of political studies or political science, as you may want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah. So was the program funded or was it funded? Was it a research program? Like a
Yeah, I have been. I think I have been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate in the sense that all my degrees were funded.
wow. Oh,
I'd
that's
never
good.
studied. I'd never studied without funding.
Funding.
I got full funding to go to Geneva to do my first and second masters. Then from there to University of Saskatchewan, it was full funded. Even the PhD that I did at the University of Toronto was fully funded.
Yeah.
This was before Vene came. You know.
Oh wow. So yeah, so that was I mean we'll talk about the University of Toronto. Because most of the people I mean I because I'm in the science area, so I am more conversant with scholarship in the STEM area. So sometimes when people reach out to me, I want to do political science as well, this arts related area. I'm not very vast in some of those scholarships. Sometimes I tell them, go to the department website and see what and what is available. There are tons of funding, even in the arts related area as well.
Yeah.
And then, yes, now after your master's at the University of Saskatchewan, then how did you get into University of Toronto? That is the number one most prestigious, highly competitive university in Canada. How was the process like for you? And then you mentioned that you got some scholarship and then also the Vanian scholarship. So did you get the Vanian scholarship when you're already in the program or towards your application process? How was that like for you?
No, I didn't get Vene. In short, I did not apply for Vene before I put in my application for the PhD program. I applied for officially for the PhD program during my second year in
The
honestly,
master's.
I think my second semester in that
That's your
program.
master.
So my master's was just 1 year. I already
For 1 year.
Yeah, I already
Oh
applied.
yeah.
So all I needed to do was just research. I didn't have to stay for 2 years. Some people,
Oh okay.
went, for that option, but that wasn't my one. I'd already done research this was, so I knew what it was, right? And at this time, I was also working towards, publications, right? Publishing one or two papers. Uh, so what happened was, and I would say this, it's very important for those who are just coming up, trying to apply, trying to get to, graduate programs and likes. The One of the persons who ended up supervising my dissertation, I had reached out to him before I came to Canada. Before I traveled, I left Nigeria for Canada.
Oh wow. That's a long time of
Yeah,
communication.
exactly. So informing him that, look, I would like to do my PhD at the University of Toronto, but I'm going, I'm coming to Canada for masters in political
Masters first.
science. But I got background in history and likes. Then we started communicating from there. When I got to Canada, I reached out to him telling him that, look, I've arrived. I'm now in Canada. I'll start working on my proposal. So like 6 months, 6 to 7 months before I officially submitted my application, I had known what I wanted to do. I had identified my supervisor, and he was well ready to supervise my work. He was really into it. So I would write, my statement of purpose and send to him. He would look at it and, make comments on it
Corrections and
and
everything.
send it to me, right?
Wow.
Oh, this is what you need to do. You need to include this color. You need to. So by the time it was ready for me to submit my application, I had a very solid, highly competitive application to put in.
Wow.
And just to chip this in, also, I was the only African admitted.
Wow. Wow.
Yes. That
I mentioned before that university is
Yep.
very competitive.
Yeah, I was the only African, admitted that year. We were 12, but I was the only African.
African.
And I was also the only African who started and finished in my set. We didn't have other cohort of Africans until I was in my final year.
Wow.
So for about 3 to 4 years, I was consistently the only African in that very PhD program.
How was that experience for you? How did you blend in, as a graduate student? How did maybe let's say your previous experience, let's say for your masters in Saskatchewan, Geneva, undergrad, how did they all prepare you for the PhD?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You see, my experiences, both in Switzerland and in Canada, in Saskatoon, that's Canada, right?
Yeah.
Had prepared me for whatever challenge that would come or that might come later in the future, right? I went to Geneva without knowing anybody, and those who were my classmates then also, they were white. They didn't look like me. You understand? So they were not Africans, right? Even though we had some Africans in other programs, I was also the only African
In that program.
in my class.
That's in your class.
Yes, I was the only African in my set. So I've got pictures on my Facebook or whatever. If you check those pictures, you would realize that I'm the only African there.
You're pretty much comfortable with being the only African in the class.
Yeah, and I love diversity a lot, right? You see, so that being in Geneva introduced me to the idea of diversity,
Diversity, yeah.
tolerance, and the likes, right? Because all my friends were non-Africans and they were non-Nigerians, right? And we moved along very, very well, right? Because then I was able to learn how to cope with, people and live with people who are not Nigerians, right? So that had prepared me for wherever I would want to go later. So by the time I arrived in Canada, I blended in immediately.
Okay.
I was able to relate with my colleagues. We related as friends, as colleagues, as brothers, as sisters, and the likes. But also, fortunately for me, I had some Africans from Guinea, from Ghana. So I had a colleague who is Guinean, and I had two other colleagues who are Ghanaians, right?
Okay.
And I'm Nigerian, right? So there were 4 Africans in my class at the University of Saskatchewan, right? So, having them around, I was able to cope. And I also had some of my friends with whom I had studied back at the University of Ibadan, also studying there at the University of Saskatchewan. Yeah. So it was like, an African community as well as a global community for me. Yeah. So as Nigerians would say, no dolly moments.
Exactly. No dollar.
It's hard dolly words, yeah. So I was able to cope. I was able to cope very, very well. Yeah. So
That's it.
transitioning from there to the University of Toronto, which is even much more diverse than Saskatoon,
Saskatchewan. Yeah.
right? Was even a bigger opportunity for me, to meet with people, relate with Nigerians, non-Nigerians, Africans, non-Africans, get to know about other cultures, other religions, other traditions, and the likes. Yeah. So I was able to blend in
That's
very
that's
well.